Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Rseat is incredibly fun. It's tuned road cars at Trial Mountain, and it's actually a copy of one of the races that they did for the GTWS Nations event in Barcelona. Let's get into it. The M3 is the meta car this week, but the LFA is almost as fast both in the time trial and the race. None of the other cars come even close except for the Supra, and it's in a beautiful red, which I happen to think has to be a tribute to Max Rita. Thanks to the custom slipstream, almost any of the cars can keep up in the straights with a little bit of slipstream, but most of the cars are left in the dust when it comes to any of the twisty parts. The Supra might actually be faster in the first sector, but it's definitely slower in the last sector. Last night I came agonizingly close to putting the Supra in the top 10. I ran out of time, but I do have the optimal. What's wild is it's the only Supra in the entirety of the top 100. I do think more people are going to start using it when they realize how fast it can be, but for now, I was the only one. You can see right now I'm about to shift at about 50% of the digital tachometer. That's the best way to ensure that you've got enough straight line speed. When you see this yellow barrier, there are a few brown patches in the grass, and at the very first one, that's when we're going to hit the brakes, downshift, and then slowly start turning in and get off the brakes entirely as we crest over this first apex. Continuing to steer left as we get back on the throttle. When we get to this first marshal right here, that's about when you want to switch directions. I do this incredibly aggressively, throwing the car to the right, trying to induce the slide as much as I can before lifting off. If you're not comfortable getting your car sideways in this transition, you can simply lift off earlier and for longer. My goal for maximum speed is to put the left tires on the curb and get the car to oversteer slightly to the right. Lift off and turn in as the car starts going down the other hill, and right here you're going to see that I dip my tires in the grass just a little bit, and that's for a little bit of extra rotation. If you're not comfortable with that, you can simply lift off a little bit later and a little bit longer. Your goal should be to get on the throttle and stay on the throttle as early as possible going up the hill. Next, look for these tire marks on the curb. I use the very beginning of that as a signal to start turning in slightly. This final brown patch in the grass is where I start braking. I brake sharply, then immediately come off and continue trying to steer in as I downshift to third, and as I get closer, we downshift again to second gear for just a brief second, pop it back up to third, and we get on the throttle as soon as we're getting as close to the wall as we're comfortable with. The exit is blind and it goes over a crest, so stay on the throttle, but be careful not to steer too much until you can see exactly where you're going. Right before this rock that's right before this yellow sign is where we want to brake. We're going to downshift to third, start turning in, and immediately downshift to second gear and start trail braking. Going to second should get it to rotate, and if you can get it back up to third gear and back on the throttle without steering so much that you understeer, the car should continue to rotate while you get on the throttle. Avoid the wall at all costs, and then start tracking out towards the middle of the track, but don't go past the yellow line. Try to follow the last tire mark over the blue curb on the left. When you get to the end of it is when we're going to hit the brakes, get to third gear, and immediately start turning in. We want to get as close to this inside curb as we possibly can. Get on the throttle as soon as you apex, but don't steer too much because you can very easily induce oversteer. Staying in third gear, continue steering to this right side wall of the tunnel. When the entirety of your car is underneath the tunnel, you're going to change directions, hit the brakes, and try to get as close as you possibly can to the inside, taking full advantage of this little banked dip part where all of the leaves are. Be very gentle on the throttle until your car has dropped into the bank, and then get fully on the throttle, continuing to steer gently. If you steer too much, you're going to under or oversteer, and either of those things are going to result with you hitting this outside wall. I mentioned this at the beginning, but it's important to note where I'm shifting. Approximately 50% of the digital tachometer, I believe it's 6,500 RPM, is where you want to shift for optimal acceleration with this car. If you're not new to the guide, you probably already know this, but a lot of cars do not like to be revved out. For our braking zone, we want to look at the beginning of the curbing on the right. There's a brown or gray spot in the grass right here, and when you get all the way past it, that's when we want to hit the brakes. After this big tree and before the curbing here in the distance, that's when we want to start turning in. Getting to third gear before we cross out of our lane. Once we get all the way through this next lane, that's when I want to come off the brakes, turn in, and we want to apex right past that big rock. Be careful as you get on the throttle because even in third gear you can induce oversteer if you steer too much, and of course we want to track out all the way to the edge of the track. Moving just barely into the left lane to set up for this next right-hander, we're going to look for the blue truck on the right, and we're going to apex just past it. Continue turning past it so you can angle yourself so that you're going left beyond this dead tree on the left, which happens to be our next braking point. Get on the brakes just before that and then get to full brakes right afterwards. We're going to look in the distance for these LED chevrons and we're going to aim for that final one. Brake in a straight line down to third gear, and then right before you start turning in, we're going to get to second gear and we're going to linger on the brakes until you feel that the car is stable, back up to third gear and then early on the throttle. Make sure you correct any kind of oversteer before it becomes a full drift. When the car is stable, start moving to the right side of the track immediately before it goes downhill. When your car is fully past the beginning of the yellow barrier to the right, that's when we want to get on the brakes, get to third immediately, start trail braking as soon as the track flattens out, and then get to second gear for rotation. Of course, we're going to get back up to third gear before getting on the throttle, and once again, be very careful that you don't get any oversteer because that will slow you down. We want to avoid the grass, obviously, as well. That will cost way more than you might think. And of course, make sure that you shift at 50% of the digital tach. Approaching the final chicane, look for the moss that's growing on the wall to the right. Right before that is a little bit of a brown patch that you can barely see in the grass, and that is where we want to hit the brakes. We want to downshift at the absolute limit. At the beginning of the yellow barrier on the right, we want to turn in, and it's going to feel like you can't make it until you pop it into first gear and the car will rotate. Go over that yellow curb, back up to second, and then get heavily on the throttle. Looking for this leftmost tire mark. When we get to the end of it, we're going to turn in, lift off, shift up to third gear, and then get back on the throttle. Not sliding would be best, but any bit of oversteer is going to be infinitely better than any amount of understeer in this corner. Make sure you make quick corrections if you do get oversteer, and of course avoid that wall at all costs. It's very easy to ruin your lap there. Alright, let's go over at full speed. Again, remember to shift at 50% of the digital tach. This first corner is going to take a lot of practice. I think that most people use too much steering and or too much brake. You can be a lot more gentle with both than you might imagine, but of course this transition here, I do it pretty ballistically. You can just simply enter a little bit slower. You're going to lose some time, but there is a lot of time to be found in this section. Downshifting really early can get the car to rotate in a lot of situations, so don't be afraid to use second gear in that corner. It seems too long for it, but it is not. Like I mentioned before, you can get the car to rotate by shifting to second really early, and if you can get on the throttle before it stops rotating, it can continue rotating as you get on the throttle. Getting and staying as close to these rocks on the right is really important for a good time. I think the big key for this left-hander is staying as close to the inside as you can and really using the banking and the camber, because you can get on the throttle extremely early if you dip into the camber really early too. What's really funny is during this straight, it's really easy to lose concentration and just kind of get lost at the pretty scenery, especially when you come out of the tunnel and then you can see all the beautiful trees and everything, but do not be distracted. You've got a braking zone coming up. Don't forget about it. I've seen lots of people just completely miss it. The apex for this corner is pretty late, but not extremely late. Right after that rock is a really good place to hit the apex. Don't sacrifice your exit to get all the way to the left of the track. You really just need to barely be in the left lane. Any amount of steering while you hit the brakes here will probably send you sideways, or at the very least not let you slow down efficiently, so just straighten out the wheels before braking. Lots of people lose it here by dipping into the grass on the outside. Be very careful. It's really easy to be looking left for your apex instead of paying attention where your car is going, and it will be disastrous there. Being both very brave on the brakes and using the downshifting to your advantage is very necessary here. It's going to feel like you can't make it at first, but when you get down to first gear, you're going to feel that car slow down and rotate, and that is the magic of that corner. I found even a full-on drift is faster than understeering and or hesitating on the throttle, so don't be afraid of getting a little sideways on that final corner. Alright, let's see how it stacks up in a race. By now, you've probably heard me talk about the chaotic Southern man Sosa many times if you watch my videos, but have you heard of the tale of Bape? Bape is another member of the team that I'm very friendly with, Street Version, the team I used to be part of, and Bape is another insane Southern man. Not only did he decide randomly to completely go full throttle into me in an earlier race, but his chaos both helped and hindered me in this race, and this entire race is pretty much just a tribute to Bape. Bape, you are a crazy person, and I love you for it. Back to the actual business of this race, there are two main things that you need to know. One, the slipstream is custom, which means you might actually have slipstream from 2 seconds back. At least 1.75, but I think it's actually active 2 seconds back. The M3 is slightly more powerful, and it can also brake a little bit later. I like to use +3 for both the time trial and the race, and tire wear isn't really anything you need to be concerned with. The biggest advantage the Supra has is the first sector. I do believe the Supra is better than any of the other cars at the first sector, and that's really important because this first sector, being incredibly high speed, is very difficult to navigate by itself, but when you add the mix of dirty air, it becomes really, really scary. So the Supra being incredibly good here definitely has its advantages. Most of the cars are actually pretty equal on the back straight, and I think that's because of the custom slip. Now, I have mentioned that the Supra is pretty bad in the final sector. You could find yourself losing positions in the final sector. However, all of the cars, given a good enough final corner, are able to pass any of the other cars before T1. If you find yourself falling back in the final sector, that's okay. What you want to do is just focus on getting a really, really good final corner, and then you can possibly pass them before the first corner. And because the Supra is the king of the first sector, if you're side by side with either of the other cars, then chances are you can brake later and carry more speed through it. I'm also realizing that a whole bunch of crazy stuff happened while I was talking about everything, but we've already found ourselves in 5th place. That is definitely partially because we got a nice bump from Grumpy Pants, and like I always say, the absolute best strategy is making friends in the split that you're in, because if you can work with someone, you're always going to have a bit of an advantage. Now, despite being in 5th place before the end of lap 1, that's not necessarily an advantage because the custom slip really makes things absolutely insane. If you look right ahead, you can see that King Ghidorah has a 1.5 second penalty, and while that might seem crazy, it's actually incredibly easy to get that kind of penalty here. There are some parts of the track where the game sees it as both the entry and the exit to 2 separate corners, and because of that, if you cut there, then it's going to give you a penalty for both the entry and the exit. What he did right there is possibly go off only 2 small corners, and that gave him 1.5 seconds, and as you can see from this, that is an absolute eternity with this penalty burning zone. Slow roller ahead only had a half second, but as you can see, that's also completely disastrous because at the very beginning, or actually it's kind of in the middle of that front straight, it really, really robs more than whatever the penalty says. If it says you have a half second, it's really going to cost you close to 2 seconds. If you see people entering the first 2 corners really fast, chances are they're going to exit really slow. So if you make sure to get a really good exit, right here is a good passing opportunity. Slow roller didn't make that mistake, so of course I was just going to stay as close to him as possible to look for any opportunity to pass. I noticed he put 2 tires in the grass, and that immediately makes it very difficult for him to slow down, and that was an opportunity for me to then pass on the inside. Now, that's not necessarily a great thing, because if you do pull off a pass in the first sector, that means that they're going to definitely be close enough in the second sector on this back straight to then pull off a move by the end of it. You can see that I'm slightly under 5/10 going into the tunnel, but he quickly then brings that back down because, again, the slip is really crazy. And if you have people working together, which you're going to see a lot, you're going to see a lot of people bump drafting to try to get up to a car that's ahead, well, you're going to have to defend going into this corner. I ended up braking just a little bit late, and that made me take a little bit too long to get back on the throttle, and he was able to take his position right back. I wasn't going to give up, so I kept trying, but he was able to get all the way in front of me before the next braking zone. Trying to avoid running into the guy in front and also avoid getting hit from behind, I made the mistake of coming off the brakes way too quickly, and then I got on the throttle really quickly as well, and that caused me to drift. But these tunes are really cool, they're really stable, so even if you do slide, it's really easy to recover. All of that mixed speed entering that corner ended up benefiting me because all the M3s behind were trying to fight each other, and that gave me an opportunity to then just attack the LFA. Of course, they caught up pretty quickly because the Supra is really bad, but looking here, like I talked about before, all I did was go super wide before the final corner, giving myself a really good exit, and you can see that it's working out beautifully. The LFA is really good, but again, I think the Supra is the best when it comes to the first sector. I had a lot of space out front, I was a little bit more brave on the brakes, and I was able to get all the way in front of him before the very first apex on that first left-hander. Taking full advantage of the fact that the Supra is really good here, I tried to go as fast as I possibly could, and right now it's all about just trying to put as much distance between myself and the LFA, and of course the M3s, as I possibly can. I know I frequently repeat myself. Not only do I say a lot of the exact same thing in a lot of these videos, but sometimes I say the exact same thing within the same video, and so once again I'm going to say that even though I passed very cleanly at the very beginning of the lap, they are still close enough, and they most likely will be close enough if you have equal opponents to then put a move on you when it comes to the tunnel. I quickly noticed that we had just about the same delta that we had the last lap, and so this time I wasn't just going to try to defend from the outside, I was going to try to do what he did and take the inside. Seeing that other M3 try to make a move on the LFA, I moved deeper to the inside, and that unfortunately gave even more speed to Payme. They were 3 wide behind me, and Payme was being really aggressive and actually got all the way next to me. Payme is incredibly good, and he's also incredibly clean, so I knew that I was in for quite the battle going into this. I continued trying to defend, I tried to give him as much space as possible, and in the end we came out side by side going into this downhill left. At this point, it was time for me to make a decision. My car is weaker in this final section than any of the other cars that are currently trying to take my position, and I know that Payme is a very good driver, as you can see, considering the fact that we've been side by side for 3 or 4 corners now. I know if I can continue attacking on the outside of this corner, I'm then going to be at the disadvantaged inside portion on the final corner, but that also means that I can use the slipstream and then bump draft Payme. I didn't know exactly what to expect from the people behind, but I was lucky enough that Grumpy Pants, just like he had before, decided to bump me, so I used that momentum to then bump Payme, and then we were off and away from the LFA. I always feel bad for situations like this though, because Grumpy Pants ended up actually losing a position because he was helping me get in front of the LFA. Now, we mentioned that Payme is a hilarious Southern man, and we also know that Sosa is a very funny and hilarious Southern man. And so I wanted to take this chance to explain Payme's screen name. His name here is A Fraud, as in he's a fraud, but his actual screen name instead of his nickname is Yankee Sosa. His entire persona when he uses this account is pretending to be Sosa but a northerner. It's complicated, but if you know either of these guys, then it's hilarious, I promise. Anyways, we are now right behind A Fraud. And the plan, like I said before, is just to bump him. If we keep fighting, then everyone behind is going to be able to keep attacking us. But if we work together, then we can go incredibly fast together. All of this, unfortunately, came a little bit too late, because now behind us, instead of Slow Roller, we have Damien and Bacon Slayers. Bacon Slayers is a very, very fast French driver, and Damien, you probably know him if you've been watching my series for a while, is one of the fastest drivers on Earth. With only 2 seconds between myself and Damien, if anything went wrong, then I knew that Damien would have it, but if everything went right, I might be able to pull off a win or at least a second place behind Mr. Fraud, Mr. Payme in front of us. Zwart is a buddy of ours from my stream, and Real Fart Smeller is a guy that we see pretty often, but I was confident that Payme and I would be able to get past them if we worked together. Seeing that one of them had a penalty right here, that made our dream of potentially winning this one coming closer and closer to a reality. Jumping forward, it only took the very first sector of this next lap to then catch up to Real Fart Smeller, and it turns out he has another penalty, so even if we can't pass him before then, he has to serve that penalty, and as long as we stay clean, then we will easily overtake him. Clearly, however, we were going to be able to get to him before the end of this straight. I was pretty certain that Payme was going to be able to pass him before the next corner, and I thought that I was just going to be able to strike while Payme was making his pass, but Payme went all the way to the inside, and I was actually able to pass him myself without having to use any kind of clever techniques, like waiting for Payme to pass and then sneaking behind him. We both got in front of him because, again, the slipstream is absolutely insane this week. Now, we have 2 full laps after we finish this lap, and so the best thing to do, especially if you formed some kind of uneasy alliance with a rival, is to stay as close to them as you can, bump draft them when you can, and not give them any kind of issues so you can both keep the best pace that you possibly can. But of course, Payme got a penalty, and then he lost his mind again. Payme just lost his mind again. You might have seen him wiggling the car back and forth. That wasn't to clean off his tires or anything. That was Payme throwing a temper tantrum. And because Payme threw a temper tantrum, he damaged both of our cars. Now, of course, he has a penalty. He has to serve it. The guy behind is serving his penalty now, so I'm going to get in front of Payme as long as I stay close to him at the next lap. But I'm not just going to settle for that. I'm going to go for it, especially now that I'm yelling at Payme while streaming because, that's right, he threw a temper tantrum. And he broke both of our cars. Now, that might not seem like that much, but not only is he costing us time because he's going pretty wild with his actual driving technique, on that front straight, that cost us about a half second, if not more. And anything that you can do to get Damien closer means that Damien is most likely going to be able to strike pretty easily. And yeah, that's foreshadowing, unfortunately. Jumping forward exactly one lap, you can see that Damien did indeed catch up. He's right on my tail, leading to the back straight, and he's in the LFA. To be 100% fair, there's a really good chance that even if Payme didn't get that penalty and then start driving like a psychopath, he might have still been able to catch us. It is Damien after all, but seeing how it took almost the entirety of this back straight for him to get in front of me, I think I might have had this in the bag. It's impossible to tell though, and either way it was hilarious. Watching Payme lose his mind for the second or third time on this stream, and then of course it just being Damien in front of us, and the fact that this is just a daily race, none of it really matters. All in all, it was a lot of fun, and Payme, I've talked a lot of crap about you in this video, but I love you very much, and I think you were hilarious yesterday. In the end, we ended up battling multiple LFAs, multiple M3s, both of those are the meta car, and if I'm unable to pass one of the world's best drivers at the very end of the race, I'm not too upset about it. It feels really good being able to get this result in a non-meta car that is really far off of the meta. So I'm really proud of what we did this week with the Supra. And of course, anytime I can pay tribute to the wonderful, the great Max Orito, then I'm pretty satisfied. It ended up being really close with Payme here too, but in the end, we did secure the second place and we got to share the podium with the two meta cars. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be making another one of these guides every single week. Thank you.